Hey guys, what's up? One of the things I try to do here is think to myself, what if present day Craig could go back in time and tell things to future Craig of 20 years ago who was just starting out investing in the stock market and other things? One of the things that comes to mind when I think about that question a lot is about economic doomers and the fact that economic doomers are always wrong. They always lose. I don't know what it is that drives some people to always have a negative attitude about investing, about the economy, about finance, about all of it. I think there's some element of it just being contrarian gets you attention. There's some of that, and I think some people truly are just unhappy all the time. But that doesn't really seem to explain it because over the last 20 years, the the number of times and the number of people who I've seen on all the way back to like Yahoo Finance and boards like that, but then eventually Seeking Alpha and other places, and even occasionally somebody will drop by in the comments on a Final Trade video, and they'll just be of the attitude that it's all melting down, it's all headed for destruction, the economy is on the verge of collapse, and that it'll never come back, it'll always be terrible. And I've known a lot of people in real life who are like that, mostly coworkers at various jobs that I've had over the years. And it's really weird because you could see that they were engineers. They had basically invested huge amounts of time in schooling and then their careers in order to increase the value of that time so they could sell it to an employer very lucratively. And yet they thought that any type of investment in the future was folly because everything's just going to imminently come collapsing down. And I don't know what the deal is, but the weird thing is you'll see these people and they'll always be talking about how, oh, I went 80% to cash or I went 100% to cash because, it's just going to, the whole thing's going to get wrecked. And, you'll follow them on whatever forum they're on, or maybe they're one of these ridiculous YouTube people. And they'll say stuff like that, and then 6 or 8 months later they'll be saying, yeah, I don't know when I'll get back into the market, it's up 30% since then. And they miss out. And that's fundamentally how I mean that they always lose. They will get out of the market partially or completely because they're convinced of whatever the new imminent disaster, and then they'll stay out while the market goes up. And remember, on a long timeline, and I know people make fun of the saying, line goes up, but on the longest timelines, markets always go up because every day people get up, they go to work, they create value, they build businesses, they hire people, they construct things, they have ideas, they do all these things that create value and fuel the economy. And so on the long timeline, that line always goes up. But the unrepentant economic doomers, I don't know if they don't realize that or they intentionally ignore it or if they're not capable of understanding it. But essentially what they are betting against is all of society. What they think is that at some point society will suffer some catastrophic event and then everybody will just go to sleep and never attempt to fix anything. And obviously we see that that's not the case. If we go back to maybe 9/11 and the tech crash in the early 2000s, obviously all those employees working at tech companies kept working at tech companies. And over the last 20 years since that crash, they built all of them into what we have now. And then if you fast forward a bit, 2008, 2009, housing meltdown, the great financial crisis, banks collapsing, things like that. At one point the government stepped in and they had a program called the New Home Buyer Tax Credit or the First Time Home Buyer Tax Credit. And if you were buying your first house in the beginning of 2009, you got a $9,000 credit from the government. And, that's how bad the situation was right then. But if anything, it bounced back too hard and we've ended up in a situation where housing prices are too high again. Not housing somehow collapsed in 2009 and never came back. And yet you had doomers in that time period talking about how real estate was doomed, how the dollar was doomed because the government would just print too many dollars to rescue the situation. How you should go full in on silver, and silver went up to like $45 at the time, and then it crashed. So all the people who cashed out stocks and went to silver, they all got, well, not wiped out, but they got obliterated, which I guess is one step short of getting wiped out. But you keep going forward, you end up at some point in the 2020 era. In March or April of 2020, oil futures went negative. Like the current oil future contract went negative. And what that means is people who had the contracts for oil had to pay people to take it away from them because they had nowhere to store it, because people weren't driving as much and all the storage was full. And so there was nowhere to deliver the oil to. And at that point, you had everybody saying, oh, well, everybody's going to work from home forever, so no one will buy gasoline anymore, and no one will rent office space anymore, so both of those industries are dead. No one will ever get on a cruise ship again, so all of the bunker oil that's burnt on cruise ships for propulsion, that part of the oil and gas industry is dead forever, and cruise lines are dead forever. And then you had people say, well, no one's ever going to get on a plane again. Well, okay, so jet fuel is dead forever. Airlines are dead forever. Tourism is dead forever. Nobody will ever go into a casino again because it's a bunch of people packed next to each other and it's a pandemic. And so casinos are dead forever. All the resort properties are dead forever. All of the real estate investment trusts that own the land underneath the casinos, those are all dead forever too. Don't forget those. People actually acted as if all the land that the Las Vegas Strip sits on would become worthless. And, this is the kind of ridiculous stuff that that the economic doomers were saying in 2020. Another good one that I bet against and made a lot of money on was bars and alcohol. Of course, nobody will ever go to a bar again because after 2020, it's just people packed together spreading disease. And so nobody will ever drink again, as if there's ever been a time in history where drinking has gone down. I mean, in the US, we literally fought a soft civil war over the right to drink alcohol in the 1930s. And people thought, well, people will just stop going to bars forever, and so alcohol companies are worthless. And man, in 2020, I bet a lot of money on alcohol companies, and I made out great on that one. But, all of these kind of things are just ridiculous. They're so short-sighted, and the kind of doomers who make these prognostications, they always lose. And that's the reality. You look at that long, long timeline of markets, and it just marches up, it marches up, it marches up. Occasionally it stumbles. Occasionally it falls enough that for a 1 or very rarely 2-year period, the market is overall down, and then it marches up, and it keeps marching up. And so, I don't get it, and it's something that I run into here on Final Trade sometimes. People will say, oh, well, Magic's dead. Hasbro's in trouble. No, Hasbro is not in trouble. Hasbro, financially, the company is fine. Financially, WotC is fine. It's hurting. It's making bad decisions. But no, Hasbro is not going bankrupt. WotC is not going bankrupt. Magic is not going away. Magic is not going to stop being the number one TCG in North America. All of these predictions of doom are as ridiculous here as all of those great 2020 predictions of doom were. And the reality is, like 2020, we're now getting back to new all-time highs of oil and gas usage. Prices are way up. People are going on vacations again. People are packing on cruise ships again. People are packing into casinos again, except to the extent that we're now going into a recession and casinos get hurt in a recession. But in the same way, Magic will recover. TCG prices will recover. The sealed box market is not dead. I had a person in a video recently ask me if I still believed in investing in sealed boxes. And I said, well, of course. All of these things will pass like they always do in every market. We have to look very hard in history to find a market that was established and functional and then one day disappeared because whatever the underlying asset that market traded in became worthless. And it's very, very, very hard to find examples of that. And so I don't know how to teach people to stop doing that, to stop being doomers, to stop hanging on every piece of negativity that they read in the financial press. It's kind of like when when folks discuss religion, and you cannot force yourself to believe or disbelieve religion. You have to come to either conclusion on your own through careful consideration and study and reading and a lot of thought. And so I can't simply sit here and tell any doomers watching this to just stop being a ridiculous doomer who always loses. But, one piece of evidence that I can point out is go search on YouTube for Economic Doom 2019. And then, Economic Apocalypse 2017. And Financial Ruin 2015. And you know what? For every single year for the last, YouTube started in, was it 2006, I think? Every year of YouTube's existence, you are going to find thousands and thousands and thousands of videos telling you that the economy is on the verge of collapse and you need to go all cash and get ready. And you know what? All but maybe a couple of those were wrong. And the reality is, maybe a few of them predicted the great financial crisis, 2008, 2009. Probably none of them predicted COVID. But even the ones that predicted the financial crisis and told you to go to cash were probably ultimately overcome by events in terms of the markets just marched past it. And I had this conversation with a friend recently. They were talking about financial crashes, and I pointed out that even if we look on a 20-year S&P 500 chart, we look back at 2008 and 2009, it's just a little dip, and then we're on back to creating value, growing businesses, creating wealth, growing the economy, creating jobs, all of those things that people do every day. I think there's somewhere in this, there's a component that's a lack of imagination among the doomers. And when you talk to them and you really try to drill down into their thought process for this, one of the things that you'll find a lot is that they believe that things are very static. And so they believe that, say, if inflation is running at an 8% annual rate in June, they think, well, it'll be 8% annual rate every month past that forever. And they don't really think that these are complex systems that have lots of inputs and lots of outputs, and most of them have negative feedbacks so that they regulate themselves in terms of, well, if inflation is too high, prices get too high, businesses start to fail, people don't have as much money to spend on a purchasing power parity basis, and so then the economy cools off and inflation slows down. So there's a natural built-in negative feedback loop to that. But I find that when you really engage the doomers and try to get them to explain the reasoning, they don't see things that way. They see all of these systems as very static, and as if they could take one reading of a measurement of the system and very easily expect that reading would be valid forever then. And so I find that's one little spot where, maybe if you're a financial doomer and you think that WotC is failing and magic's going to go away and all the sealed boxes will be worthless, think about that. Think about what might happen if things get really bad for magic. What kind of negative feedback loops might you see that eventually will come into force? And I know one that I've been telling people about a lot recently is everybody's worried that WotC is going to go to this direct to retail, or direct to consumer model for everything, and they'll just cut card stores completely out. And when they do that, then they can just raise the prices to anything they want. And, that's preposterous. But the reality is, as WotC pushes harder and harder with direct to consumer, card stores have the power to push back, because they will simply say, well, we're not going to host magic events anymore. We're not going to buy as much magic. We're not going to carry as much in the store. We're not going to carry as many singles. When a new person walks in wanting to get into a game, we'll steer them to MetaZoo or Flesh and Blood or Weiss or something else, and not towards Magic. And so WotC relies on those card stores for the steady stream of new players. And the negative feedback that will result from WotC moving more and more to a direct-to-consumer model is that the card stores will not feed new players towards Magic. And ultimately, that's what really restrains WotC from going full on with direct-to-consumer. And so, think about think about negative feedback loops like that that you can imagine that disprove the kind of doomer attitude if you're one of those. Now, I know there's not many of them on this channel, and I know the demographics from YouTube tell me that half of my viewers are men between 35 and 55, and typically by the time you're at that point in your life, you are mature enough as an investor, you've seen enough market cycles, you've seen enough crashes that you know, yeah, things bounce back, the world keeps on going, people get up and go to work tomorrow, they keep creating value. And so you don't really do that. I find it's mostly amongst younger people who are less experienced investors that you get these kind of ideas that, well, one day the whole market could just turn off and be worth zero and it would remain that way forever. So I don't know, I probably rambled on enough, but it's discouraging to see people kind of track that way. And it's one of the things that I would wish that I could go back in time and tell young investor Craig that, hey, there's this group of people out there who are eternally negative despite always losing on that bet. But, it's more about getting yourself to a place where you can just kind of learn to ignore those people, because if they're always wrong, why would you waste time on them? So, I don't know. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join me on Final Trade. Join the Patreon.